Hi, I'm Gervase Bush, the one of the founders of the Bushe-Marshak Institute for Dialogic OD, and one of the editors of our series of books in Dialogic OD. And I'm here today with Gwen Stirling-Wilkie to talk about her new book, From Physical Place to Virtual Space: How to Design and Host Transformative Spaces Online. Hi, Gwen.
Hi, Gervase. How are you?
Good, thanks. And thanks for taking a little bit of time with me. Why don't we start by having you tell our audience a little bit about how you got into the field of organization development?
Yeah, and this is a question I often get asked, and I guess accidentally is the first word that springs to mind. My background is in kind of very commercial organizations, sales, retail sales, and operations. Um, and yet, when I find myself where I am here today, and I look back, I can see some strands that come together. And I think probably one of the first significant strands was I worked for Body Shop International, which I think is a fairly well-known global brand founded by Anita Roddick. And that was probably where I first got really curious about culture change, around the nature of being a change agent, through being invited to lead what I would now call a culture change project. At the time, I was sorting something out, and I really enjoyed it. I have to say, I made a bit of a mess of my first attempt, but there was something about that nature of bringing different people together. And the other thing that was fabulous from Body Shop was that Anita was always really curious, traveling around the world, particularly west coast of the States. And we're talking late 90s, mid to late 90s. So there was lots of exciting stuff emerging that she would bring over. So I learned about future search. I took part in open space sessions, but I had no idea what any of this was. So that's probably one of the building blocks when I look back. Another one was when I volunteered with the Youth Development Charity and spent 4 years out in Namibia, which is an incredible country right in the bottom southwest corner of the African continent. There, I learned firsthand all about group dynamics. When you bring over 100 18 to 25-year-olds together and you send them off into communities all across this country in small groups, you learn about group dynamics, what works, what doesn't work, and how leadership gets developed and how cultures get formed. So I think a lot of my practice has been very intuitive.
Mhm.
And then I wanted to formalize. I didn't really know what OD, this thing called organization development, was until I happened to bump into Mayanne Chong Judge at a session. And she was like, well, you do OD. And I'm like, do I? I don't even know what this thing is. And that was probably the first point where I went, some of this stuff I've been doing intuitively has a name, it has a place, there's this whole field.
Right.
And I immediately kind of felt at home.
Oh, that's great. Well, I know you also did a graduate work at Ashridge, which until
Yes.
recently was probably one of the best places in the world to study dialogic OD.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
I did. Their master's program there was phenomenal, actually. It really was a great place to immerse myself and get some kind of formal learning, along with the NTL OD certificate program, which I did as well in Oxford. Yeah. So those are two big foundation stones of my dialogic OD practice.
Mhm. Well, you've got both the credentials and the experience, and I know you have a flourishing practice. And like most of us, when the pandemic hit, uh, all of a sudden we couldn't do the work we normally do. And I know this book came out of your experiences with a particular client and a particular project that started just as the pandemic hit. And tell us a bit about that, and about that project and what happened for you during it.
Yeah, I mean, it was as we all went through. It's what we're early February now, a year later. So if I wind the clock back 12 months, we were just in the early stages. Myself and some colleagues were just in the early stages of preparing to work on a large transformation project across a group of businesses, five businesses in total, um, with lots of multiple locations. And, we were kind of getting ready to roll this project out. And then all of a sudden it was like, oh no, hang on a second, we need to stop and pause. And then I'll never forget this phone call. So the transformation program director phoned me up and she went, the CEO has just asked me, could we do this project virtually? And I kind of went, probably, yes, maybe. So it was a real moment of a client being hugely courageous and me kind of going, well, I know some things. We know it works in a face-to-face way, but let's see what happens. And I've always been very experimental in my practices anyway. So for me, it was just this amazing opportunity to see the art of the possible and to see what happened. I probably wouldn't have consciously gone in and gone, let's do this whole thing virtually, because like a lot of people I've spoken to, I was a little bit kind of hesitant about the place of virtual working, virtual consultant, virtual learning, and really thought I could do my best work face to face. And that got blown out of the water, from the beginning of March last year onwards.
Mm-hmm. Well, that case forms a great case for your book as we follow you going through even, and my understanding is you never actually met this client face to face ever from the beginning to the end.
No.
And we follow you doing a whole series of generative conversations and hosting a lot of different dialogic events and the arc of that. It's now, what, 8, 6, 7 months later, 5 months later, like what's happened in that organization? What would you say were the results of the work you did?
I think there is still the energy around the work that we did around creating this leadership framework. And I'm still in conversation with my client in there. And it's still got that energy that was generated in a way that really surprised everybody, because there'd been a kind of a bit of a level of disengagement. If people physically turned up for workshops, they weren't fully present. But it seemed to, working virtually, just seemed to capture people's imagination in the midst of a lot of uncertainty. And I think there's something about the rhythm and the design of frequent short sessions, which people feel able to connect with. And the momentum that was generated in that tight group of people has just kind of spun off into many different areas across all of the group, which is fabulous. Yeah. Looking back, it was an amazing project to work on, and felt really kind of, now it feels very like groundbreaking. At the time, there were moments when I was like, I've got no idea what's going to happen next.
Well, that's not unusual.
It's probably amplified I'm not quite sure what's going to happen next.
So I've had many takeaways from your book about things like how to monitor group process online, how to create a safe container, thinking about those sorts of issues, some of the extra hosting duties that I need to think about because I'm working online. And one of the most important for me was your frame of participation model and your message that we can't just take the ways we would normally design a Dialogic OD event and just do that online. We have to actually design for the online environment.
Yeah.
Could you say a bit about how you think about that now? What's different about designing for the online environment?
I think for me, it's thinking about not only about that period of time where, there may be, I don't know, 12, 15, 30, whatever the number of people gathering together. For me, it's thinking about what starts beforehand. And so, I have this mantra in my head about connection before content, because in order for people to really participate, they need to feel safe, they need to feel connected, they need to kind of get a sense of what's expected of them. So what can be done beforehand, either individually or collectively, to get people ready so that when they log on and show up, they're ready for participation. They've done some pre-work, whatever that may be. And there's all kinds of things to think about and to include as part of that preparation, so that when you get them together for a workshop or an event, they're really ready to give the best of themselves, which is what you want.
Yeah, that's a great message, and a great message to end our talk on. So thanks so much for writing this book for us. Bob and I are really excited about it. It's extremely timely, and I hope those of you watching this will go take a flyer and buy a copy of from from physical place to virtual space. Thanks, Gwen.
Thanks, Gervase, and thanks to you and Bob for reaching out and asking me to write it. I've really enjoyed it, and I hope anybody who reads it takes something from it.